Today, we're going to have a very special journey into the construction business. NCC is one of the largest players in the Nordics construction market and operates in Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Finland. And they build a lot of things, not only infrastructure for travel, transportation, energy, and water, but also sustainable housing, offices, healthcare buildings, schools, sports facilities, and public buildings. So really almost everything, at least from my limited construction experience. And I have the pleasure of speaking today with Ismo Tiittanen. He's head of strategy and development for building in the Nordics, Finland. Ismo, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Christian. Pleasure to be here.
Ismo, where are you joining us today from?
I'm joining you from, let's say, a bit foggy Helsinki. So not the perfect weather here, but typical Finnish winter weather nowadays.
And you are in the office, you're in the home office. Where are you at the moment?
Yes, this is one of our meeting rooms here in the Helsinki office. So unfortunately not today with a customer, but here in the head office.
Yeah, it looks very prestigious and nice. So looking forward. And before we dive into business, maybe I'm curious. I don't know if is there a Finnish tradition or habit that you think the rest of the world should adopt?
Tradition, I think definitely if you're not accustomed to the Finnish sauna tradition, definitely you should go. And I mean the traditional, very Finnish sauna, not the latest kind of light versions.
Very good, very good. Yeah, so especially at this time of the year, I think it's very enjoyable. Great tradition. Ismo, I noticed that you've been, of course, in leadership roles for a while. And I mean, I would be really interested to hear from you what sparked your interest in business transformations. And can you tell us a bit about your journey from consulting into the world of construction?
Oh, yeah, that's actually a bit of a tough question. What sparked me into the business transformation scene? I would say that the journey chose me and not the other way around. So after graduating, I actually ended up signing up with a small boutique consulting company, and I had the pleasure to work with one of the leading telecommunications provider in the world at that time, and that was really a really valuable lesson of how do you actually drive business transformation systematically, and what are the peculiarities there. So along those times, I also had the pleasure to work then with one of the leading consulting companies in the world, Deloitte, and after a while, I found myself working with Deloitte with even larger transformations. So after spending a couple of years in management consulting, I found myself taking the next step on the customer side, and since then, for a bit more than 10 years, I have now walked the path of the real estate sector, and the latest 8 years in the construction side in different leadership roles. Has been a really exciting experience as well.
And what is it that you're doing today at NCC?
A lot of things, I would say. I'm overlooking, of course, all our Finnish landscape when it comes to business planning, doing strategy work. But the other side of the kind of a position is to look after the internal development activities. And that entails developing the management system, analytics, AI, and of course, making sure that all of our kind of internal development projects are proceeding as planned. So kind of a PMO role in that. One thing what is very particular for the construction industry is the VDC, virtual design and construction. So how do we actually embed digital solutions, digital design into our operations, and therefore drive change and improve productivity and efficiency from customer point of view.
How would I explain this to my grandma? So can you give me an example of what that should look like?
Good question to your grandma. Let's say driving the digitalization agenda and ensuring that we play in the right playing fields when it comes to the Finnish market.
And that building, that digitalization of the building, is that also something that you mentioned just in the last answer? So having sort of like everything, every maintenance, everything that is required, not only in the build process, but later on is digital, almost like a digital twin of the real asset, so to say.
I would say that our role is practically the integrator of services for the construction process. So maintenance of the, let's say, digital solutions when it comes to the existing buildings in use phase, that is not the primary focus of our operations. More of how do we benefit the customer during the construction process is the primary focus.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, I'm really I find it fascinating that you say, okay, there's so much going on from digitalization, internally, but also externally, where I would say like many people would think maybe about construction as a very classic or traditional industry where maybe change is a bit slow. Yeah. How would you describe what are the key areas for transformation that you see happening there?
Yeah, I think that's once again a very good question. So much is happening that it's actually one of the key tasks to make sure that we have a clear focus on where to put our kind of a change efforts into. A lot of things are happening on the legislation side. We get a lot of, especially environmental new regulation that we need to make sure that we comply with. Driving the sustainability agenda per se. So trying to find new solutions that reduce the CO2 footprint of construction process and the end products. But also I think AI will be one of the key things to really transform the way how we run operations going forward. So and for having AI into productive use, you need to make sure that you have the data being collected in a digital format across the life cycle of construction projects. So quality data and then taking the next step with AI are probably from digitalization the biggest areas we're working on right now.
And can you give us some use cases on these AI topics? So will the AI build the buildings? I don't know, steer robots that do the construction work in the future? How would AI, where does it play or will play a role in construction?
Yeah, I think we have twofold areas where we really see the big benefits. One is improved design and decision making. So how do you optimize the design of the building so that they meet the customer criteria? And also how do you kind of take in the learnings from previous projects so that you don't make the same mistakes twice or thrice. So using AI there to, let's say, avoid the pitfalls that are inherent in a construction business. And then the other area is actually monitoring and managing the construction process itself. So there are a lot of solutions, autonomous drones, for example, that can do the, let's say, monitoring and follow-up, progress follow-up. But it's still a not very common to use the actual robots to build the construction or the building itself. There are so many variables that are not standardized. Starting from the location, it's always unique. You have specific weather circumstances. You have different subcontractor groups out there. So it is a difficult environment for kind of a robotization in the actual building process per se.
But it's fascinating. So I know here in Düsseldorf, there is right next to our office a big construction site where they build a new office, and they have cameras everywhere. I think in the past there were only security guards, but now they have cameras everywhere to supervise the construction site. But of course, there is probably a lot that is just for safety reasons, I assume, is mainly.
Yeah.
But I think in the future, I think also on the final quality checks and everything, you say that could be done a lot through AI.
Yeah, for example, we have already in some 10 or so projects, we have used a commercial solution. I won't mention the name here because it would be too much advertising for the company, but we are using a solution that actually compares the digital plans and the time schedule and compares that to current situation, and it happens with 360 camera. Kind of one person goes through the entire construction site maybe once a week, and then the reality capture techniques and the AI then compares the progress into what the plan is, and it highlights the deviations, the quality deviations, the schedule deviations, and then it practically suggests what you should do in order to keep up with the original schedule. So these are the examples that are really already existing at the market, and the magic comes from how do you integrate that into your management practices. So it's not just technology being pulled into the game, but how do you really act on it and take the necessary corrective actions if something doesn't go as planned.
And how do you go about it? I mean, I would assume that it's quite at the core, maybe also of a company. Do you integrate and build that all yourselves? Do you get help from externals like consultancies, freelancers, experts? How do you go about developing these capabilities in the organization?
Yeah, this is always a good kind of a balance to keep in mind. You always need to have sufficient capacity and competence in-house to manage these activities. But of course, let's say the mass or the volume that specialized companies have, they have accumulated so much more knowledge and so much more competence in their very specific niche. You always need to kind of rely on someone knows better than you actually do. So definitely they play a role. But I would say that we are using specific partners who are really specialized in certain areas and try to kind of integrate that into our value delivery to the customer. And in those cases, when it comes to construction projects, freelancers are rarely the solution. So it's more like establishing long-term partnerships and using companies with very distinctive capabilities.
And why is that? Is it because a single person doesn't have or could not have these capabilities that, let's say, one of these long-term partners would have? Or what would be the reasons from your perspective?
Yeah, I think when it comes to, let's say, architecture design, there we definitely have some smaller companies where it could be freelancers as well. So they are producing the architecture design. But then it comes to, because one construction project takes usually from let's say the minimum time from the idea to actually having a building constructed is maybe 2 years, and you need to kind of run through many of those to accumulate the knowledge. So if we rely on one person, the kind of a turnaround time and the cycle time in the projects is rather long. So in order to accumulate the latest knowledge and latest innovations, you usually need some kind of a more volume and background from a larger company to really get the benefits up and running.
Yeah, it makes sense that you don't capture too much of a critical knowledge in a person. I mean, it's always in all businesses probably. You want to avoid that because, of course, you don't want to become dependent on
individuals too much. Definitely. And having said that, I don't believe in that kind of a very strict process-driven approach where nothing is dependent on persons, but you need to kind of ensure that you are not building lock-ins into people that you're kind of lost if the person leaves or something happens to him or her. Taking that one level up, where you say you want to build those long-term strategic partnerships and you want to make sure really it fits together and it brings together multiple solutions to a bigger solution that then basically is really a nice offering for your clients. How do you bring those many externals together and create an ecosystem that is functioning? And how do you make sure in the end also the projects get delivered and or the product is created at high quality? Yeah. For the construction projects, I think it's always a unique setting. So each project is delivered kind of specifically. So the first step actually when you start a project is to assemble the right team for the project. And that means that, for example, we don't have architecture design capacity in-house, but we rely on a selected set of partners. And if some partner, for example, has experience in designing, let's say, swimming halls, and they're particularly good in that area, then that partner is brought into that project. Of course, taking into consideration that the commercial aspects are being agreed on, we see eye to eye on that area. But it's a matter of combining the right group of people together and then actually creating the mechanisms for working together. So I think where we see the most kind of risks being realized on either poor design or a project going wrong is areas where we just kind of order something from our partner and then it's being delivered and it's up to us basically to integrate. But more you create these environments where you actually produce ideas together, plan for the best approach and integrate your different plans in the most effective way, then you get the best results. So kind of a joint operations and common goals are key to creating good outcomes. I love that because so you say specifying everything, breaking it down in individual chunks and then handing those chunks out and in the end being responsible to fitting it all together again is inferior to say, let's create some, let's say, joint team that has a common goal and they all work together. Is that how I understand? That's pretty much it. And if I kind of take it from cost optimization point of view, the latter might be the option that you would go for. You probably get a lower unit price if you break it down and just have a very competitive process and you bid and take the lowest bids and take care of the integration yourself. But it so often leads to sub-optimization. So each part is only optimized for their own part, and it's very difficult to actually get this working together. And this applies to construction projects, but also development projects and the consulting engagement I used to work with. So it's also a motivation factor for the people involved that they feel that we share a common goal and we are not kind of fighting with each other to who delivers the best on their own side and who kind of who wins. It's better if everybody wins. No, I understand it completely, and I think it's a nice way if you can bring so many different parties together. Very practically speaking, how do you do it? How do you create that goal? If I were to picture myself, for example, as a consultant, and you need to bring all these people together, or you're in a PMO role, so to say. How do you practically create that? Do you sit everyone on a table? Do you have it? Just write it down and everyone signs it in the beginning. Practically, how do you do it? Yeah, I think it's important for the management or the leaders of any engagement to point out the goal. This is what we're after. That usually cannot be a kind of a democratic discussion. Now we decide that are we looking after a profitable project, or are we looking after the best customer satisfaction? But that needs to come kind of from the management. But having done that, I believe that then when people come together after having a clear goal and defining this is how we work together, this is how we reach those goals, and kind of it builds commitment to the common plan that they're creating. If you just hand over the plan and say execute, it's so easy to say that I didn't really commit to this plan because it was done by someone else who doesn't care how I feel about it. And on practical terms, I think the joint kind of planning sessions are key. But then when we go into delivery phase, for example, these big room practices where you actually have a shared physical meeting room where you maintain the status and you assemble maybe once a week and go through and see where are we, who needs to do what in order to keep us on track. Those kind of practices are really useful in creating this commitment and collaboration.
We talked a lot about AI in the beginning. Do you see AI, I mean, it's a big word, but do you see some sort of an AI tools taking over that internal coordination also for those projects where you said, like, look, physically, we're going to be together in one room maybe once a week to see what's going on, what is the status? Where do you see that evolving to? Where am I coming from? We see a lot of companies, of course, now pushing people back into the offices. Others are more those type of remote first companies where say, I don't care so much as long as we get the result done. You can work from anywhere. Yeah. How do you see this evolving in construction? And also, do you see a bigger role for AI maybe taking over those program steering roles?
I see the role of AI bringing kind of fact-based, data-based situational awareness and maybe recommendations, but people are eventually the ones who act on it. And especially since construction, as far as I can see in the future, it still happens somewhere in a physical location and you need to build something physically. Then it also makes sense that the people who are working with the projects are meeting physically in that place. Because AI cannot kind of grasp on that kind of ideas. What is the mentality or the atmosphere in the working site? Are people frustrated? Are they tired? Which usually leads to occupational hazards. So you run into safety problems, you run into motivational problems, quality issues. But if you have a kind of a nice feeling to it, and we feel like now we're working as one team, and you hear the laughs at the work site, then you really kind of feel that okay, this is going into right direction. And AI cannot replace that kind of emotional awareness and feelings, but they can bring a lot of facts into the table that takes the kind of a cognitive pressure from people. So they don't have to spend time in collecting the data and making observations. AI can do that, but how do you act on it once again? What is the impact on people? That's where you still need the human brain and heart to be in place.
Amazing. And I mean, we're coming almost to an end, but because I touched on a lot of topics, looking back at our conversation, is there anything that we did not yet cover that you would say it's super important to mention?
Oh my God, that was that was such a question that I think I spoke my mind on most cases that I wanted to have. Maybe the one thing that we didn't touch on is how do we instill the change and the transformation in an industry like us, where you actually need to set up, for example, a construction project. you need to follow the same approach, in my opinion, from the beginning to the end. So you cannot be always changing the way how things are done during the construction project. So when we implement things, internal development, let's say new tools that we use for financial reporting, for example, it should be in a way that one project, whenever it is started, it adopts the new tools, new ways of working, but then it kind of follows that through to the closure, and with exceptions, of course, but you need to kind of give them the how do you call it now, but let them do their work in a way that you have instructed them in the beginning, and avoid too much change happening at the same time, because the environment will be that chaotic. You have a lot of things to be on your mind, even if you don't always try to change things from the outside at the same time.
And that is a great point. Do you see any role of consultants in those change processes that you described? I could imagine, I mean, there is a lot of tools, of course, in any organization that are being introduced or retired or updated. Yeah. So there is a constant change management. And for example, on larger IT or ERP transformations, you would see people dedicatedly for a certain amount of time, at least, come into the organization to help communicate the change, but also maybe run trainings on the new software, also being there a bit to really encourage everyone to use and work with the new tools.
Yeah, I see the role that, of course, you need some additional capacity at times. If you have a peak, you don't necessarily find the right people, even if you want to have them on your own payroll. So you don't necessarily have the competences inside. Especially in construction, many of the employees are at the end engineers. I may be an exception. I'm not an engineer, so I am having a hard time sometimes, kind of being kind of a credible figure when we talk about change and what it really means. But you need to kind of tap into the world that the engineers are living in. But on the other hand, you might need to then sometimes pull in some additional competencies that are not necessarily the traditional engineering competencies that we have plenty of. So in that sense, the consultants are very welcome, and they bring valuable insights of how you actually, let's say, handle the people side and pedagogical kind of aspects, make people learn and facilitate the change process.
Very interesting. And if you think about that, and maybe talking to our listeners also, if you could give one piece advice in that regard to professionals navigating transformations, what would it be?
One piece of advice, I would say that you really need to be in touch with the daily kind of workflow that you're trying to change in some way. So I'd say too often we see change initiatives that you try to change a small piece in the middle, but even if you have designed it perfectly and have the perfect argumentation for transforming the small piece, when you enter the daily life of an employee who actually does that task as part of the other duties on a daily basis, he or she has a certain workflow which is maybe already optimized in a sense. And if you don't kind of recognize that how this change impacts the other tasks and duties the person has to do, you might end up actually messing up the perfect flow and introduce waste into the project. So lean thinking and identifying if you're actually introducing value adding or waste into the process, it would be something I would focus on.
Thank you very much, Ismo. It's been a great afternoon and great speech. Thanks very much for joining us today. And If listeners want to get in touch, how can they connect with you?
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me. It has been a pleasure talking to you. I can be contact. I think my contact details are also found around our ncc.fi internet pages, but LinkedIn, you can see the same name and the same hair restricted figure there as well. So please feel free to touch base with me. Happy to talk to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much and have a great afternoon.
Thank you. You too. Thanks for the listeners.